Last year, we had Mark Rosekind speak at the World Safety Summit, one of our favorite speakers, well received. He's got a great background. If you don't know, he again has degrees from Stanford, Yale, and Brown University. He's been working on the science of safety for the last 30 years, including 2014 through 17, where he was the administrator for NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. I love his varied background in NASA and other great endeavors about fatigue and safety around that. Dr. Rosekind, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to your comments.
Always a pleasure, Charlie, and I'm so pleased to join you. And in fact, let me just add to the thanks, if you don't mind, as a way to begin. I think we need to acknowledge that 3 years ago, even though there were so many meetings out there in the AV industry, we got to really credit Velodyne for starting a meeting specifically focused on safety. And here we are 3 years later in collaboration with WAJ, basically continuing that path. And I think it's just so appropriate that we begin the event by talking about safety. And so let me screen share and let's go right to that presentation. So today, I want to talk about setting the bar for safety because we have so many new opportunities within the new technology that's coming. And I say new technology to really cover ADAS as well as fully autonomous vehicles. And there's a chance here not just to meet safety opportunities, but to really innovate in areas that we have never seen before in road safety. And let's start though, because it's always my job to make sure that we talk about sort of why we're doing this. Ashley Halsey III did a really interesting article where he showed over the last 20 years, we've lost more people on US roadways, 624,000 people that died in car crashes, more than we lost in 2 world wars. In fact, that number is 535,000 Americans lost in 2 world wars. So we've lost, just in 20 years, almost 100,000 more people on our roadways. And most people know the number in 2019, there were 36,120 lives lost on our roadways. And I bring this up because one of the classic questions people talk about in this arena is how safe is safe enough? And what's interesting is we've actually never answered that question for our current road safety system. And I say that because if we had kind of figured out how do we answer how safe is safe enough, then we'd be able to take that information and basically apply it to the challenges we have now to demonstrate how this new technology is going to create new opportunities for us to save so many of those lives, if not all of them. And so one of the things I like to highlight is 100 people losing their lives every single day is clearly not a safe road system. And so one of the things that I've been asking for years is, so what are the metrics that we're going to use to define road safety? Not just the new ones that are coming, but even now. And we're going to talk about this, but for 100 years, road safety has mostly been reactive. And so historically, metrics we've used have been things like crashes, injuries, fatalities, but reactive means we wait until a crash happens, and then we're counting what the bad outcomes are, basically, that happen in that crash. What would the new metrics be that we need if we're going to be seeing maximum opportunity realized with new technologies? And one of the ways to think about that, of course, is this number that so many people talk about, that 94% of crashes are related to the human. And I always position this as it's really 94% of those crashes, which, by the way, is the last link in the chain of events before a crash occurs. 94% of the time, that is a human choice or error that leads to that crash. Now, some people know the 94% number, but they haven't necessarily looked at the NHTSA paper that was published in February 2015. But this is a great graphic from that paper because it shows you where that 94% is broken down. Recognition errors, decision errors, performance and non-performance errors related to the human. What usually doesn't get asked is, what about the other 6%? And you see that on this graphic, which is pretty interesting, is 2% are related to defects and recalls, the service faults. 2% are related to the environment. That's both the roadway as well as weather. 2% to unknown. So it's important to realize that there's this huge opportunity within the 94% for us to address what's causing crashes out there. And I put this in because one of my friends at the NTSB, a colleague, was actually confirmed as a board member at the NTSB the same day I was, sworn in the same day, Dr. Earl Weiner, a former Boeing engineer. And he talked about safety always having to go after the big bars. If you know where the errors are, you have to go after the big bars if you want to make the most difference. And so I think we can think about this in terms of a bell curve. And there are, for us, that curve represents the big bar. Certainly the 94% of where we have an opportunity for us to eliminate fatalities on our roadways. But it starts with just making sure that we're addressing the basic rules of the road. Humans are making choices about speeding, driving drunk, driving tired, being distracted and picking up that cell phone. We need to start with all this new technology to make sure just the basic rules of the road are followed, that you go the speed limit, you stop at stop signs and red lights, that you stop for pedestrians in crosswalks. There are just basic rules of the road that have to be followed. And then above that, there are other things that we have to predict. When that pedestrian is heading to the crosswalk, are they crossing? Or what about the nuanced situations where they actually have their head down and maybe they're listening to earphones in some way? So in the middle there, we have the big bar for safety, things that we have to address if we want to reach our safety opportunities. But we also need to acknowledge, literally by definition, the edge cases are in the tails. So that 2% plus basically of those corner cases, they have to be addressed. But let's make sure we continue to focus on that big bar where we know the 94% opportunity exists. And the other thing that I've talked about over the last few years that I think we're just starting to see now in the industry is how we transform road safety from a reactive to a proactive safety culture. Because it used to be that basically the reactive safety culture in auto was crashes are going to happen. And then you worry about protecting people or the emergency response to save their lives. What we really need to get to, which is on the other side of the slide here, is a proactive safety culture. Because the epitome of that is preventing crashes from happening in the first place. And one of the things that we've done at Zoox to really translate that is to make safety a core value at the company. It becomes the foundation for everything that we do. Every person should be able to relate their job and their work to literally the DNA of our company, which is about safety. And I put this up here because people know I think language matters, but a lot of folks like to talk about safety as our number one priority. But priorities change. And this is from my NTSB experience. You know, safety can be the number one priority this week, but next week it's the schedule or the budget or resources. Safety literally needs to be built into the DNA of your organization. Make it a core value. Make it the foundation for everything else that happens. And at Zoox, one of the ways we've done that is turn certain things literally on its head. And so many people are probably familiar with a classic human factors pyramid that's got errors at the bottom, which can lead to near misses, and that can lead to incidents which are at the top of the pyramid. And so the philosophy of Zoox that we have is basically prevent and protect. This is a way to translate into a proactive safety culture. And so in this case, when there's a risk, you want to prevent it. If that risk emerges, you want to capture it. That's the prevent part. And then if an incident actually does emerge, then we want to make sure we protect people with all kinds of systems that are already in place for us to protect people, and where possible, innovate. But this is sort of an example, basically, of how you take that proactive safety culture and translate it into a safety philosophy of prevent and protect. And so let me give you just sort of 3 examples of some safety innovations that we're looking at Zoox. You know, most people think you can have safety or you can have innovation. You can't have both. If you've got, safety, it's going to put you in a box. You're never going to see innovation. If you're innovating, it means you got to break things a lot and you're never going to get safety. I actually believe we need innovation in safety as much as we need innovation in the technology arenas. And so these are just 3 examples. And they are, as people will notice, related to our reactive historical safety culture, because they all deal with protection. But think of these as opportunities for us to look at long-standing areas within safety that we can actually innovate and bring higher levels. And so a few examples just from Zoox. How do you actually get 100% seatbelt use before a trip starts? If you don't have a steering wheel or other operating controls, that steering wheel where you put the airbag, well, there's an opportunity to actually create an enhanced airbag design that protects people differently in a differently configured interior design of a vehicle. And most people realize that the front seat of a vehicle has different higher crash worthiness standards than the rear seats. And in the last year, people are just starting to talk about it. But at Zoox, where we're actually building a vehicle from the ground up, there's a chance to basically have the same high level front seat crash worthiness for all seats within the vehicle. And so again, we can go from high level philosophy to what's in your DNA to safety innovations that literally get down to the specifics of what you can innovate so that we can get even more safety from the things that exist today. Just 2 more slides. One I just wanted to highlight is all of us can think about how proactively we can identify safety objectives. We need to look at what the opportunities are and what our objective targets are for us to try and enhance safety, while we also acknowledge very clearly what are the risks. But I also want to point out, for all the work that gets done in simulation with safety drivers on tracks, on private roads, etc., all of that work really remains hypothesis until we actually deploy AVs. And this is classic within the auto industry, is that usually the industry is developing new technologies, and then you wait to, once it's on the road, to actually be able to measure it. And that's what this last segment is until we actually see AVs deployed, we will not have an opportunity to actually evaluate the safety effectiveness. We have to do everything possible before the tires hit the pavement, but we also have to make sure that we are prepared in a proactive way to evaluate whether those safety objectives are actually getting met. And the bottom line here is also pretty critical. While everyone loves to focus on the potential of eliminating 94% of crashes due to the human, we have to realize that AVs also mean we could be introducing all kinds of new risks related to the new technologies. We have to be thinking about those, we have to be identifying and addressing them as much as we do traditional kinds of safety risks. And lastly, let me end here. Last year, I talked about how a crash is not an accident, and we really need to change our language to focus on crash. This year, I wanted to focus on trust, because so many people are talking about, if we want to realize the benefits, we really have to ensure that people trust this new technology. And so here are just 3 areas that I wanted to identify that are going to be critical for us to actually build that trust. One is data. Just as we've been talking about, we need to identify the new safety metrics, collect it. And the second point here is we also need transparency, so that people actually know not just claims, but the factual data that we've collected to show that these systems are safe, and we hope actually get us more safety than currently exists on the road. So the transparency is more than just the data. It includes the methodologies and the other things that have been done to try and make these systems safe. And then the final thing I just want to highlight is trust also comes from experience. And this is one of the challenges for our industry. And you got to give folks a lot of credit, Waymo and others that are starting to get folks out there actually in their vehicles. And that experience is going to be critical for people to be able to trust this new technology. And at Zoox and many other places, we clearly give rides to folks with safety drivers, et cetera. But until there are systems out there where people can get in and literally in a matter of a few seconds, they're not even realizing there's an autonomous driver. Without those experiences, it's going to be hard to fully build the trust. So I'm going to finish there, Charlie. And I know we're going to have a few minutes, hopefully, here to actually talk a little bit. And I'll stop sharing and look forward to chatting.
Yes, we will. It was interesting. You brought up that one point right in the beginning, Mark, in terms of, and I even retitled it, that last link you were talking about when the accidents occur, at that 94% certainly is driver error, but, what led up to that, perhaps? It made me think of attribution, one of the things that everyone tries to think about in website development and engaging with customers in a sale. It's, there were so many messages or so many incidences of connection that led up to that it's hard to, put attribution at the very last part. And I thought that was a great way of verbalizing that, and me thinking about, what led up to that, all of a sudden, that sudden decision, that led to the accident. Were they not informed enough ahead of time that there was danger ahead, or was there a mechanical issue or that type of thing that led to the driver? So it's an interesting, is there actual concerted effort to then, reassign perhaps, if we could, at least share attribution or share the blame?
Yeah, and I think that's what that figure gets to, and why I always recommend people go to that article, because, if I can use the medical model, you can't do the treatment until you've made the diagnosis.
Right.
That's what we're talking about here, right? Is making a more refined, if you will, segmented diagnosis that allows you how to really target your intervention. And so, yes, to your point, you need to be able to make that attribution so if people are driving drunk, how do you focus on that? Different than people picking up their cell phone, right? There can be behavior's hard to change, but there can be different technology interventions or treatments that could actually help you deal with that particular risk.
So we're seeing implementation, and we're going to talk more about it throughout the day, of ADAS, the Advanced Driver Assist Systems, kind of the first step, perhaps, to safety. I'm reminded many years ago when ABS came out, it enabled us to be a little bit safer in terms of braking situations. However, maybe our habits overrode those in the sense that maybe we were driving a little bit closer than we would have in the past. Can you comment on that, ADAS, and made me think about it when you said the cell phone, maybe we can be a sense of safety, whether it's the lane holding devices or the intelligent cruise. How are behaviors tying to that?
Sure, and let's go to your first point, which is really critical, and I try to do that early. I hope it holds through the event, is we need to talk about new technology. People love to jump right away to the excitement of fully autonomous vehicles, but the reality is ADAS is new technology as well, and that's already enhancing safety. Automatic emergency braking, the lane keeping that you're talking about. There are all kinds of things that can block cell phones or answer for you so you're not actually having to pick up the phone. And I think it's interesting to your question about behavior is whenever humans have a behavior issue, related to safety or health, etc., if it's hard for us to change the behavior, we look to technology to help us figure out how to do it. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. And again, that's the point, which is there's a very broad continuum here of different technologies from ADAS to fully self-driving vehicles, basically, that can help us with this human behavior problem. And by the way, I say that in spite of the fact I love to drive. I think we'll always have horses and cars, that will be able to do that. But how do we use the technology to our advantage that we might actually eliminate roadway deaths?
And again, you mentioned ADAS all the way through fully autonomous, but then, talking about safety, you even went back a few steps to mention the word seatbelts. And I think when you talk about behaviors, for whatever reason, I never fastened a seatbelt in a taxi. And therefore, it took me a while to start fastening a seatbelt in an Uber or Lyft or a shared ride. I mean, was I telling the driver that I don't trust you? But effectively, that's one of the great safety items we had in the vehicle, but talk about behavior in it.
And it's a classic. Now, in our country, 91% of people wear their seatbelts. But in fatal crashes, 50% of the people that die were not wearing their seatbelts. And coming from the NTSB, I can tell you, I don't care how you're moving, whether it's in an airplane or a car, that seatbelt is really sort of your first safety technique, right? The safety intervention that everybody should be using.
There we go. We solved it all with the seatbelt. Hey, Mark, thanks again. And the background with NHTSA is great because we have the current administrator will be giving us a message later on today. And I know that it's a nice tie-in there. And again, the cooperative effort between the government and the private sector in developing all of the safety. So, Mark Rosekind, Zoox, safety officer, thank you very much for kicking us off today at the World Safety Summit 2020. So great to see you.
Have a great event.